And to illustrate the situation means that while I'm going to deliver a speech today, we need to talk about the movements in the region and the future of the region according to what we understand. So we need to illustrate the situation. This is the summary of what we are going to discuss today. First, there is no doubt that what has taken place in Syria is the result of a joint plot by the US and Israeli regime. Yes, it's true that there's a neighboring country of Syria which has played a clear role, and they're now playing that role, and this is being seen by everybody. But the main planners, the main players are, and the main conspirator, the main planner and plotter, the main command center is in the US and the Zionist regime. There's evidence for that, and this evidence leaves no room for doubt for anybody. One of the indications is their behavior and attitude toward this incident, toward these developments. In a country, whether you are against with the government of that country, a war broke out, two groups clashed with each other. Okay, this can happen everywhere. Why do you interfere? And the Israeli regime, according to what has been reported, have targeted over 300 areas in Syria. Why? If you have not been involved in these events, if it is not related to you, so just watch what's going on in Syria. Two groups are having clashes, and your interference in the war and targeting over 300 areas in Syria. And the US has announced themselves that, mind you, until yesterday, it might be even more after that, that over around 75 other targets have been bombarded by the US. Some of these regions targeted by them were infrastructure areas of Syria that it's hard for any country to build and construct them. And in any country, they need to try very hard to build airports, research centers, to train scientists. They're not simple things to do. Why does the Zionist regime and why does the US were involved in this situation, and they became one party of the war, and they began bombarding of the country. 300, 400 targets were bombarded, and that's not a simple thing. The Zionist regime, in addition to this, have occupied Syrian territories. Their tanks reached the vicinity of Damascus. The Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria, and we're in the control of them. They're now trying to occupy other regions. The US, Europe, and some states are sensitive about these issues in other areas of the world, even for 10 meters or some tiny areas are sensitive. Not only they're silent, but also they do not object. This is what they have done. In addition to this, there's another evidence. In the last days, before the toppling of the government, some of the humanitarian aid used to be sent to Syria or some specific regions in Syria, or in particular for example, an area near Zainabiyya, and that was essential for the people in those areas to benefit from equipment, forces, and it was supposed to be transferred to those regions. They all blocked the areas leading up to those regions, and they were blocked by Zionist and U.S. warplanes. F-15 warplanes did not allow any aircraft to transit the region. But there was a bravery by one of our pilots, and they landed in that area. But we should have seen more humanitarian aid, but they blocked that. If you claim that you are not involved in this situation, if you say that you are not the ones that are fighting against Syria in the name of one particular terrorist group, for example, or one armed group, for example, if you're not backing those groups, why do you do such things? Why do you interfere? Why do you help them? Why do you stop from humanitarian aid to be transferred to Syria? Of course, those groups that I told you have specific intention. Their goals and targets are different from each other. Some of them from southern or northern Syria are seeking to occupy the land. Some of them, the U.S., for example, is trying to reinforce its foothold in the region. These are their targets and goals. And the time will prove, and the time will show that, God willing, none of them will reach their goals. Occupied Syrian territories will be liberated by the hands of brave Syrian youth. There's no doubt that this will happen. The U.S. foothold will not be reinforced. With God's grace and with the help of God, the U.S. will be kicked out of the region with the resistance front. I told you about the resistance front. Let me tell you something about the resistance front. The players of the hegemonic world are happy after the developments in Syria. They express their happiness. They think that with the toppling of the Syrian government, which was in favor of the resistance front, they think that the axis of resistance is weakened. Then they express happiness. They say that the resistance front is now weakened. I think that they're making a big mistake. Those who think that with these things the resistance front has been weakened do not have a correct understanding of the resistance and the resistance front. They don't know what the resistance front is. The resistance front is not a software to be broken or collapse or be annihilated. The resistance is a faith, is a thought. The resistance is a decision made by heart. The resistance is a school of thought. This is what many people is faithful to. This is not based on a contract. I'm going to tell you later that why people are faithful about the resistance front. By exerting pressure, not only it does not become weakened, but it also become more motivated. After seeing the atrocities, they will become more motivated, and the scope of the resistance will be expanded in the region. This is the nature of the resistance front. When atrocious crimes committed by the enemy are seen by the people in the world, those who are doubtful that whether they need to resist or not, they no longer doubt, and they will understand that standing up to bullying and standing up to those who commit atrocities is the only way to survive. We need to stand up to them. We need to resist. This means the resistance. Look at the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah. Look at Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad. Resistance fighters of Palestine. Pressure has been exerted against them. What has gone through Hezbollah was not a joke. Hezbollah lost a figure like Hassan Nasrallah. Attacks by Hezbollah, the power and strength of Hezbollah, and the big blow by Hezbollah inflicted on the enemy became more, and the enemy accepted that and admitted. They thought that after they dealing blow to Hezbollah, they can enter the Lebanese territories, to the river, and to move ahead, but they failed. Hezbollah resisted and withstood with full power, and what they did resulted in their acceptance of ceasefire. This is the resistance. Look at what took place in Gaza. Now, after a year and some months, they've been bombarding Gaza. Prominent figures of Gaza, a person like Yahya Sinwar was martyred. They have dealt such blows. Despite these blows, people are still resisting. They thought that by putting pressure on people, people themselves will stand up to Hamas. But the thing that happened was vice versa. People became more interested in Hamas. The same thing happened for Islamic Jihad. This is the resistance front. The more pressure exerted, the resistance front will become stronger. The more crimes are committed by them, the resistance front will be more expanded. And I'm telling you that God willing and with the help of God, the scope of resistance will include the whole region, God willing. That ignorant an analyst who was unaware of the meaning of resistance, they think that after that the resistance was weakened, the Islamic Republic will be weakened as well. But I'm telling you that with the help of God, Iran is powerful and become more powerful in the future. Let me tell you another sentence about the resistance front. The resistance. Let me tell you first that what resistance is. Resistance means standing up to the dominance of the US and any hegemonic power. This means resistance. The resistance means to fight against any independence on these hegemonic powers. Resistance means nations are not the slave of these hegemonic powers. Resistance means, and with this meaning of resistance, is rooted in the beliefs of the people in the region. I'm not talking about the states in the region. I'm talking about the nations and people in the region. They are attach importance to resistance. Resistance is rooted in their beliefs. You have seen that what nations in the region have done for Gaza. They don't know their language of people in Gaza. They don't know people of Gaza. But all across the region, whether, for example, we can say in the sense that all across the world, people have stood up against the Zionist regime and for the sake of people of Gaza. This is a common belief of people in the region. Look, right now, for 75 years, approximately for 75 years, have passed after the occupation of Palestine. 75 years have passed. Okay, an incident that took place 75 years ago should naturally be forgotten, gradually be forgotten by people. It should be abated. But today, the resistance of the people in the region and Palestinians themselves for the sake of Palestine, for the issue of Palestine, might be even more than what took place at the beginning of the occupation. It might be 10 times more than that. Instead of being abated, it's being intensified. This is the feature and this is the characteristics of a common belief. And it's ongoing. It will go on. The red line for the people of region is to be accomplice with the Zionist regime. I'm not talking about the states in the region. They may say something else. If you ask people in the region, they're against that. They're opponents to that. The majority of the people in the region are against that and are opponent to that. Of course, they commit crimes, Zionist regime commits crimes, but crimes will not make anybody become victorious. Neither the crimes committed in Lebanon by the Zionist regime, nor the crimes in Gaza, nor in the West Bank, that Palestinian groups are fighting against the Zionist regime. They commit a lot of crimes there, but crimes will not make anybody become victorious. And this is what has been stipulated by the God Almighty. And the experience, and the historic experience is taking place in Gaza and Lebanon before the eyes of everybody. Well, there's a question that is being brought up. According to what we talked about the developments in Syria, whether and we had the presence in Syria for years, and everybody knows that we had presence in Syria. Martyrs of holy shrines, the martyrs that defended the holy shrines in Syria. This is an indicator that we had presence, but what was the specification of the presence? We need to explain that. One major point and one important point is that everybody is aware of our presence. We had funerals for the martyrs, but there are some points that most people are not aware of that. At least our youth are not aware of that. We helped the Syrian nation, but before we helped the Syrian government in a very critical juncture, the Syrian government helped us and provided us with a vital assistance. Most people are not aware of that. In the midst of the sacred defense, 8-year war with then Iraqi dictator, at the time that everybody helped the Iraqi dictator Saddam and used to work against us, the Syrian government at the time initiated a very determining big factor in favor of us and against Saddam, and that was to block an oil pipe that was used to be sent to Mediterranean, and the money used to be sent to Saddam. They blocked that pipeline. And that brought chaos in the world, and they did not help them and did not allow them that the oil belonged to Saddam to come to them, to that region. 1 million barrel per day was used to be sent to the Mediterranean region at the time. The Syrian government itself used to benefit from this transit of oil, and they used to have profit from that transit. But in return, the Islamic Republic responded to this service provided by them. So that was the first point. And in the case of the sedition by Daesh, Daesh meant a bomb of insecurity. Daesh was to make Iraq and Syria insecure and make the entire region insecure, and then reach the final target, which was the Islamic Republic, and it was meant to make the Islamic Republic insecure. That was their ultimate target. That was the meaning of what Daesh was seeking. We had our own presence. Our forces were deployed to Syria and Iraq because of 2 reasons. One reason was because of preserving the sanctity of the holy shrines in Syria. They were against the sanctities and spiritualities, and they had enmities with holy shrines and Muslim sanctities. They were seeking to destroy those places, and in Samarra you saw that they destroyed them with the help of the U.S. They destroyed the holy shrine in Samarra. They wanted to repeat that in Najaf, in Karbala, in Qazmain, in Damascus. That was the target by Daesh. Okay, naturally, it's clear that a faithful, brave youth who loves Prophet Muhammad and his household will never ever allow that to take place. That was the first reason. Another reason was the issue of security. Official in charges understood immediately that if they do not stop them from instigating insecurity, they will come to our own country, and all across the country will witness insecurity. And that was not very ordinary for Daesh to instigate insecurity. You saw that anything took place that at the time, for example, in Shah Cheragh incident, in Kerman, in Iranian parliament, and some other similar incidents, wherever they could, they instigate some crises. And as the first Shia Imam Ali, has said that a nation who is engaged in a war with in their home will suffer maladies and problems. Therefore, our prominent figures, our prominent generals like General Soleimani and his companions went to those regions in Syria and Iraq as well, both in Syria and Syria. First in Iraq and then in Syria, they deployed forces and they organized Syrian youth and Iraqi youth in those areas, and they withstood Daesh and defeated Daesh, and they managed to defeat Daesh in those regions. This was the summary of our presence in Syria and Iraq. Pay attention, please, that the type of Iran's presence, Iran's military presence there in Syria, in Iraq as well, was not meant that we deployed IRGC forces, our army forces to those areas, and our army fought instead of the army of that country. So that was not true. This is not logical. This is neither logical nor is accepted by the public opinion that an army of us is deployed to that country and fight against the enemy instead of their own army. The army of that country was responsible for fighting against enemy. What our forces could do, and they did, was to provide advices. Advisory presence means that to lay out the strategies and tactics, and if needs be, to have presence in the battlefields, and more importantly, to organize and mobilize the youth of that country themselves. Mind you, our own youth, like volunteer forces, Basij, were willing to have their own presence, and many of them were sent, although there was opposition to that. I've been asked and I've been requested. They used to send messages, they used to plead for that, to let us be deployed to Syria to stand up to the enemy. Naturally, there were some considerations. It was not suitable. But they used to be transferred. They used to go there through different means that you're aware of them. And they used to go there. Some of them became martyred. Some of them, with the help of God, came back to the country. So we had advisory presence, mostly, in Syria and Iraq, and in some few cases we had military presence of our own forces, but mostly our own forces were voluntary forces from Basij and other factions. In Syria, Martyr Soleimani organized a group made up of thousands of people from Syrian youth. They were organized and they were mobilized and they stood up against the enemy. And later, of course, unfortunately, some of the forces and some of the officials from that country themselves generated some troubles, and what was beneficial for themselves was neglected, unfortunately. And afterwards, when the sedition of Daesh was abated, some of our forces came back, and some of them continued their presence. Out of the forces were deployed, some of them continued their presence, and they still had presence in recent developments and recent incidents. But as I told you, the main war was the responsibility of that country's army. Another voluntary forces coming from other country worked along with the army of that country. If they showed weakness, if the army of that country showed weakness, and that was unfortunately what took place in Syria when the spirits of resistance subsides, these maladies, these problems, and these crises we see in Syria, that God knows will continue until when Syrian youth, God willing, Syrian youth will come to the battlefield and prevent them from go on. This is the result of the weakness we had in the past. The Iranian nation is proud of its army and its IRGC force. The nation is proud of its army and IRGC force. Top officials of the armed forces of the country write letters to me saying that in the case of Lebanon, Hezbollah, we do not tolerate. Let us come to that. Let us go to that country. Make a comparison with the army of a country that cannot tolerate and escape in the tyrant regime of Shah. The army was in a similar state, unfortunately. In the face of any attack by enemies, foreign enemies in different wars, like in the Second World War, they did not resist. They did not withstand, and the enemy came to even Tehran at the day because they did not resist. They don't resist, this will be the result. We need to resist. We should make use of the force bestowed upon us by God. And even in the difficult situation like now, we were ready to help. I was told that all of the facilities, equipment Syrians need is now ready to be sent, but the airspace was closed All of the channels on the ground were closed. The US and the Zionist regime closed both the airspace of Syria and the ground channels, and there was no possibility. This is the situation. Motivation is, if the motivation had been high, if they had the ability, if they had the ability to resist, the enemy would have been unable to close the airspace, and we could have helped them. That was a summary of the picture in Syria. There are some other points that should be mentioned. One point is regarding the fact that everybody should know that the situation will not remain like this. Okay, one group in Syria, like in Damascus, is happy. They invade and storm people's houses, and the Zionist regime bombards, they deploy tanks, munitions, but the situation will not remain like this. Definitely, the courageous Syrian youth will rise, and they will resist, and they will make sacrifices. There will be fatalities, but they will prevail over the current situation. It's like people in Iraq, brave youth in Iraq did the same thing. Brave Iraqi youth, with the help and guidance and command and organization of our great martyr, they became able to kick out the enemy from their houses, from their land. The enemy, like the US, used to do the same thing in Iraq. They stormed people's houses before the eyes of children and women. They used to beat men's houses on the ground. Similar things, such things took place in Iraq, but people in Iraq withstood and resisted. Our great martyr made use of all of its facilities and equipment. Of course, we might see that it will be prolonged, but the result is certain and definite. The second point is that Syria's developments and Syria's incidents, for all of us, for our officials in charge, have some lessons to be learned. They need to learn from them. One of the lessons is the issue of negligence over what the enemy does. Yes, in these incidents, enemy acted very quickly, but they should have predicted that before the incidents took place. They should have predicted that the enemy would act quickly. We had helped them in this regard. Our intelligence apparatus months earlier had some warning reports, provided Syrian officials with these reports, but I'm not sure whether these reports were delivered to those officials or not. Our intelligence apparatus, the officials of our intelligence apparatus, used to inform them since September in Shahrivar, Mehr, Iranian calendar. There were back-to-back reports. We need to avoid negligence. We need to avoid what negligence or what enemy does. We need to be vigilant and not to assume that the enemy is not powerful. And we need to avoid trusting the enemy. Sometimes they talk to others in a very positive manner, but behind what they say is a saw, and they are looking for an opportunity to come. Another point is that the resistance front should not be proud of and should not be what they achieved, and at the same time they shouldn't be disappointed of their failure. Even in our personal life we will see that there are a mixture of success and failure, and in different groups' lives we have the same thing. Sometimes there are successes, sometimes defeats and failures. Sometimes a group is in power, sometimes they are not. Even that's the case for governments. There are ups and downs in anybody's life. Ups and downs are inevitable, and we cannot avoid that. But what's necessary is that when you're on top, when there is ups, we should not become arrogant. Because arrogance will become humans to suffer from negligence. And when there is a down, when you're in the bottom, and when there is a failure, we shouldn't become disappointed. Over the past years, in the past 40 years, in the Islamic Republic has seen difficult incidents. It has witnessed difficult incidents. The youth might not have seen those days. One day in Tehran, people used to sit in their houses. An aircraft manufactured by the Soviet Union, belonged to Iraqi dictator Saddam, used to come to the airspace of Tehran, and if sometimes they avoided bombarding, but they used to frighten us, and we couldn't do anything. We didn't have air defense system, and we didn't have enough facilities. We faced such situation. And one day in the Iranian capital, Tehran, people were in their houses, and out of the blue, Saddam's warplanes came in and bombarded airports, some other areas in Tehran. I myself on that day was in a factory near Mehrabad airport, and I had a speech. I saw myself the Iraqi warplane that dropped their bombs, and then they left the area. We saw such things. The Islamic Republic has confronted and has faced such bitter incidents. But despite all of these incidents, the Islamic Republic has not been inactive even for 1 second. Passivity is rejected when it comes to Muslims, faithful Muslims people. Passivity and inaction sometimes is more dangerous than the action itself. Passivity means that the human jumps to this conclusion that they cannot do anything, so they need to surrender. Pay attention, please. This is going to be my last statement. So, when it comes to developments, progress, success, arrogance is rejected. And in failure, problems, inaction is also rejected. And it's like a poison. And we need to be vigilant. And we need to stay vigilant in this regard. The Holy Quran says, the leader is reciting the verse of the Holy Quran. You need to express gratitude toward what God has given to you. And you need to apologize for what you was short of doing so. But some people and some few people are trying to make people frightened and disappoint them. This is rejected. Some people living abroad do so. Some media outlets outside Iran, like TVs, radio stations, that they talk to people in Persian language, they portray the situation in a way that people will be frightened to disappoint them. So their case is different. We need to confront them in a different manner. But inside the country, nobody should do similar things. Inside Iran, if anybody in their analysis, in their expression, talks in a way that its meaning is to disappoint people, this is going to be a crime and it should be prosecuted. Absolutely, the Iranian nation is ready to work in this regard and help in this regard. Obviously, the presence in any region of the world needs the acceptance of the government of that country. We had presence in Iraq at the request of the Iraqi government, and we had presence in Iraq at the request of the Syrian government. And we had our own presence after the request and acceptance of those governments. If they do not, if they don't make requests, it won't happen. God willing, the root cause of the Zionists and the root cause of the atrocious players of the West will be kicked out of the region. God willing.
Thank you for joining us. So that was the leader of the Iranian Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, giving a speech, and we're going to go over some of the points that he made during that speech that he gave. He explained the situation in Syria and tried to reassure the people of the region and the people of Iran, letting them know that what has happened in Syria, while it is unfortunate, will not lead to the collapse of the resistance axis against Israel, and ultimately the United States and Israel will be kicked out of the region. He also mentioned the reason why Iran was in Syria and Iraq at the time when Daesh and ISIS was overrunning these two countries, and he said that the reason Iran was there